All right, we're about to unpack a story that is just staggering. It starts with a small credit union in Nebraska and spirals out to allegedly involve some of the most powerful people in the country. Today, we're diving into the truly shocking claims of the controversial book, The Franklin Cover-Up. I mean, talk about an opening line, right? The book kicks off with this huge question, and right away, you know you're not in for a simple story. It's designed to pull you straight into a world of power, politics, and some really dark secrets. It basically sets the stage for everything that's about to unfold. So you have to ask yourself, who's the guy making these incredible claims? Well, the author, John W. DeCamp, is about as far from a fringe conspiracy theorist as you can get. This guy was a Nebraska state senator for 16 years, hailed as the most powerful and effective in the state. He's a decorated Vietnam veteran, the founder of the world-famous Operation Baby Lift, and as an attorney, he won a massive, landmark case against the Catholic Diocese for covering up child abuse. So when someone with this kind of background makes these accusations, you kind of have to stop and listen. Okay, let's dive in. We're going to start where this whole thing first broke into public view, with a seemingly ordinary financial institution in Omaha, Nebraska. So from the outside, this looked like a pretty standard story of financial trouble. November 1988, the feds show up, they raid the place, lock the doors, and boom, a local credit union goes under. But as the story goes, the missing money, that was just the very, very tip of a dark and disturbing iceberg. And at the center of it all was this man, Lawrence E. Larry King. And here's where things start to get, well, weird. On the one hand, he's just the manager of a small community credit union, but on the other hand, he's a big-time Republican Party player, known for throwing these incredibly over-the-top parties in places like D.C. and Dallas, with major national political figures showing up. The book poses the obvious question, how does a small-time credit union manager afford a lifestyle like that? It just doesn't add up. So as investigators started digging into the financial collapse, they apparently stumbled onto something far, far more sinister. According to the book, the missing money wasn't just embezzled, it was the fuel for something truly unspeakable. And here it is. This is the absolute bombshell at the heart of the book. The claim is that the Franklin Credit Union wasn't just a failed bank, it was a front, a slush fund for a child trafficking ring. DeCamp alleges that millions of dollars were being laundered through this tiny credit union to procure kids for powerful, elite figures. And that quote you just saw, it perfectly captures Larry King's alleged role in all this. According to a social worker who had been trying to sound the alarm for years, King was the linchpin. You know, he wasn't just some guy who was part of it. He was supposedly the organizer, the one connecting the money, the powerful people, and the victims. Now, the book builds its case on some incredibly disturbing testimony from a number of alleged victims. You have witnesses like Alisha Owen and Troy Boner, who described being paid for sex at these parties with powerful men. Then there's Paul Bonacci, who testified he was used as a drug and sex courier, flown all over the country. And then came the most explosive allegation of all, a claim from Nellie Patterson that she had seen the Vice President of the United States, George Bush, at one of these parties. Okay. So, if you've got allegations this massive, reaching the highest levels of government, you have to be asking, how could something like this possibly operate in secret? Well, DeCamp's book has one simple, chilling answer: a massive, coordinated cover-up. The author claims that every single time someone tried to get to the truth, they just hit a brick wall. He alleges that law enforcement ignored evidence, that the courts protected the powerful, and that even the local media actively worked to discredit the victims and anyone who was investigating the claims. This brings us to a really key figure in this story, Gary Caradori. He was the chief investigator for a special Nebraska legislative committee that was formed to look into the scandal, and he became more and more convinced that he was the only one actually trying to find the truth, and he started getting scared as he got closer. And just look at this timeline of his last few months. It is absolutely chilling. In January, he's reporting threats. By April, he's sure his phone is tapped. In May, he writes that, quote, "We just saw, fearing the whole thing is about to get shut down." And then just 2 months later, a small plane carrying Caradori and his young son crashes. The book presents his death not as a tragic accident, but as the ultimate act of silencing him. So after all these years, all this horrifying testimony, What was the official outcome? Well, this is where the story, according to DeCamp, becomes a complete and total tragedy of justice. The grand jury's final report came out, and it was a stunner. It concluded that the entire story was a hoax. It said there was no conspiracy, no child abuse ring, nothing to support any of the claims. Case closed. But what happened next might be the most unbelievable part of this whole affair. Let's just look at the fates of two people. Alan Baer, a rich guy, named by witnesses over and over again, he walked away with a $500 fine. Meanwhile, Alisha Owen, one of the key witnesses who refused to change her story, was charged with perjury for lying and was sent to prison. And it wasn't just DeCamp who thought this was insane. Even the legislative committee that hired the investigator, Gary Caradori, was baffled. I mean, their own report basically says, wait a second, the people who stick to their stories go to jail, but the ones who admit they lied don't? That makes no sense. It's a bizarre contradiction that became a huge part of the book's argument. And all of this brings us to the final, haunting question that DeCamp leaves us with. It goes way beyond just the Franklin case. It's a much bigger, much more troubling question about power, about justice, and about whether we can trust the very systems that are supposed to protect us. And regardless of what you believe really happened in Omaha, that's a question that really sticks with you.